Welcome to Whispers and Confessions. There might be a twist waiting, so please make sure to watch until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's begin right away.
My name is Emily, a 55-year-old woman who has been married for 3 decades. Our children have flown the nest, carving out their own paths in life. For the past few years, my husband Michael and I have been inhabiting our 2-story house in a serene neighborhood of downtown Chicago, just the two of us. One unremarkable morning, the kitchen was filled with the gentle burble of the coffee maker. Golden sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow on 2 mugs perched on the counter. Michael, engrossed in his newspaper, muttered indistinctly while sipping his coffee. Meanwhile, I busied myself with breakfast preparations, the silence between us palpable. "It's a glorious day, isn't it?" I ventured, attempting to bridge the quiet. Michael's terse "yeah" was the extent of his response, effectively ending our exchange. I couldn't help but reminisce about the early years of our marriage, when laughter and conversation flowed freely between us. Now, it felt as though an invisible chasm had opened up, separating our hearts. Later that afternoon, while engaged in household chores, I stumbled upon an old photo album. As I leafed through its pages, I was transported back in time, our radiant wedding photos, the carefree smiles from our honeymoon, and cherished moments capturing our children's early years. Each turn of the page tugged at my heartstrings, and I found myself grappling with a sobering question: when did this distance between us become so vast? That night, sleep eluded me. Lying in bed, I listened to Michael's steady breathing beside me. As I studied his profile in the dim light, a fierce longing welled up inside me, a desire to breathe new life into our stagnant relationship. The following day, I met my longtime friend Sarah at a quaint cafe. Sarah, a constant in my life since our college days, exuded her characteristic vibrancy and enthusiasm. She had recently embarked on a new venture teaching yoga, quickly garnering a devoted following among her students. "Emily, it's been ages. How have you been?" Sarah greeted me, her cheerfulness infectious. "Oh, just getting by," I replied, my gaze fixed on my coffee cup. "Every day feels like a carbon copy of the last." Sarah's eyes twinkled mischievously. "Why not shake things up a bit?" "I've recently taken up a new hobby myself," she said with a knowing wink. "To be honest," Sarah continued, lowering her voice, "I participated in a partner-swapping event with my husband." My head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. "Partner-swapping?" "I know, I could hardly believe it myself at first," Sarah admitted. "But after mustering up the courage to give it a try, it actually brought us closer as a couple." She then launched into an animated account of her experience. As Sarah regaled me with tales of meeting new people and rediscovering herself, I found myself increasingly intrigued. "But isn't it risky?" I inquired, unable to mask my concern. "Of course, safety is paramount," Sarah assured me. "These events take place in secure, trusted environments with strict guidelines. Above all, mutual consent is non-negotiable." As I absorbed Sarah's words, a seed of an idea began to take root in my mind. Could this be the change we need? Upon returning home, I found Michael in his usual spot, slouched in front of the television, fatigue etched on his face. "Michael, do you have a moment to talk?" I asked tentatively. "What's on your mind?" Michael responded, lowering the TV volume with the remote. "I've noticed we don't communicate much these days, and our time together seems to have dwindled," I began. Michael's expression registered surprise. "Is that so? Work has been rather demanding lately," he offered hesitantly. "I think it goes beyond that," I pressed on. "What if we tried something different? Something to reignite our spark?" Michael's brow furrowed. "Something different? What did you have in mind?" Taking a deep breath, I plunged ahead. "Well, Sarah mentioned this thing called partner swapping. I was wondering if perhaps we could consider giving it a try." As soon as the words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically, tension crackling in the air like static electricity. Michael stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Partner swapping? Are you serious?" That's completely out of left field," he stammered, clearly struggling to process my suggestion. I know it sounds unconventional, I admitted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. But don't you think this could be an opportunity for us to rediscover each other, to reignite that spark we've lost? Michael's brow furrowed deeply, his lips pressed into a thin line. There have to be other ways to reconnect without resorting to such extreme measures, he countered, his voice tinged with a mix of confusion and concern. What would you suggest then? I challenged, meeting his gaze with unwavering intensity. We've been drifting apart for years, Michael. Something needs to change. My words hung heavily in the air between us, and I could see the conflict playing out across Michael's features. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind a whirlwind of doubts and second thoughts. From the doorway of his study, I watched Michael's hunched figure, surrounded by stacks of neglected paperwork. His hands were motionless, his gaze distant. I knew my proposal had thrown him into a tailspin of confusion and introspection. As I observed Michael's slumped shoulders, a wave of uncertainty washed over me. Am I making a terrible mistake? I wondered, my stomach churning with anxiety. What if this desperate attempt to save our marriage only serves to drive the final nail into its coffin? Several tension-filled days passed before Michael approached me, his expression a mix of resignation and determination. All right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We can try it once. But we have to promise to maintain our trust in each other. This can't be about replacing what we have. It has to be about rediscovering it. I nodded, a complex cocktail of emotions, relief, excitement, and apprehension, coursing through me. Thank you, Michael, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. I truly believe this experience will be beneficial for us, for our relationship. We decided to attend a reputable partner swapping event that Sarah had recommended. The venue was an upscale hotel suite in the heart of downtown, promising discretion and security. As we entered, I was struck by the diverse array of couples mingling in the space. Some appeared nervous, others excited, but all seemed to share a common purpose, a desire for change, for connection, for something more. As the event commenced, participants began introducing themselves, the air buzzing with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. It was then that I met Daniel, a man roughly my age with kind eyes and an easy smile. He approached me, extending his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said, his voice warm and inviting. I must admit, I'm a bit nervous, but I'm looking forward to an enjoyable evening. Meanwhile, I watched as Michael was paired with Jessica, a vivacious young woman whose infectious laugh seemed to immediately put him at ease. I hope tonight allows us all to make some fascinating discoveries about ourselves, she remarked, her eyes twinkling with excitement. As the evening progressed, Daniel and I found ourselves engrossed in conversation. We discussed everything from our favorite books to our most cherished travel memories. His wide array of interests and experiences captivated me, and I found myself hanging on his every word. I can't believe how quickly time flies when I'm talking with you, I confessed, acutely aware of the flutter in my chest, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. It was then that Daniel gently took my hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. Emily, he said, his voice low and sincere, you're truly an extraordinary woman. I've been drawn to you from the moment I first laid eyes on you tonight. My breath caught in my throat as I met his gaze. Thank you, I whispered, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I feel the same way. It's as if I'm falling in love all over again. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, and as our eyes locked, I felt myself teetering on the precipice of something both exhilarating and terrifying. Emily, would you mind accompanying me for a moment? Daniel asked, his voice a rich baritone that sent a shiver down my spine. He gently took my hand, his touch both electrifying and comforting, as he led me out of the bustling hall. The air between us crackled with anticipation, each step bringing us closer to an unknown adventure. As we exited, Daniel's eyes darted around, a mischievous glint dancing in their depths. With a swift motion, he opened the emergency stairwell door, revealing a dimly lit sanctuary away from prying eyes. We stepped inside, the door closing behind us with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Without hesitation, Daniel pressed my hands against the cool concrete wall, his body radiating heat as he leaned in close. His lips met mine in a passionate kiss that took my breath away. The softness of his mouth contrasted with the intensity of his desire, creating a heady mixture that left me dizzy with want. I surrendered myself to the sensation, reveling in an excitement I hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. My heart raced, its thunderous beats drowning out the distant sounds of the party. A delicious shiver ran through my entire body, from the crown of my head to the tips of my toes. For a fleeting moment, a pang of guilt about Michael flashed through my mind, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating thrill of this new experience. Years of monotony and routine melted away, replaced by an intense emotion that demanded to be felt, to be savored. In that moment, I made a conscious decision to push all worries and concerns aside, focusing solely on the exquisite sensations coursing through me. Daniel's hands, warm and slightly calloused, found their way under my clothes with an expertise that spoke of experience. Each time his fingers slowly traced down the curve of my spine, it felt as if he was leaving a trail of fire in their wake. I trembled involuntarily at the sound of his ragged breathing in my ear, the hot puffs of air sending goosebumps across my skin. It had been so long since I'd felt this alive, this desired. Time seemed to stand still in our private cocoon, the rest of the world fading away until only Daniel and I remained. I found myself intoxicated by a scent, a heady mixture of sandalwood and something uniquely him. My senses were overwhelmed, and I felt myself losing touch with reality, slipping into a dreamlike state where only pleasure existed. The knowledge that someone could suddenly appear in this space should have worried me, but instead, it only added to the exhilaration. Our increasingly labored breathing echoed in the narrow confines of the emergency exit, the sound amplifying our mutual desire. As we grew closer, Daniel's hand slid up my skirt with agonizing slowness, his fingers leaving a trail of fire on my skin. Every point of contact between us sent an electrifying jolt through my entire body, awakening nerve endings I had forgotten existed. Wrapped in his strong arms, I felt as if I had been transported to another world, one where only Daniel and I existed. Our bodies fit together perfectly, like two pieces of a long-lost puzzle finally reunited. Consumed by an all-encompassing desire and passion, we fully immersed ourselves in the moment, savoring every touch, every kiss, every shared breath. The intensity of Daniel's want was palpable, reflected in the dark depths of his eyes. I could see the barely contained desire threatening to overflow, mirroring my own mounting excitement. We were rapidly approaching the zenith of our shared passion, teetering on the edge of an abyss of pleasure. In the emergency stairwell, we spent an intense and intimate secret interlude. The sweetness of forbidden attraction mingled with the dangerous excitement of our clandestine encounter, creating an intoxicating cocktail of emotions. We fully savored each precious moment, knowing that soon we would have to return to reality. After our blissful encounter, we reluctantly disentangled ourselves and made our way back to the main hall. As we entered separately to avoid suspicion, my eyes immediately sought out Michael. To my surprise, I found him engaged in animated conversation with Jessica. A smile played on his lips, and I noticed a liveliness in his expression that I hadn't seen in years. The sparkle in his eyes spoke volumes about how much he was enjoying his interaction with her. As the event drew to a close, participants began exchanging final pleasantries with their partners. I hurried back to Michael's side, my mind still reeling from the intense experience I had just shared with Daniel. As we prepared to leave, Daniel approached us. "Thank you for today," he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "I hope our paths cross again someday." I smiled, a mixture of emotions swirling within me. "I had a wonderful time too," I replied, my voice steady despite the tumult of my feelings. "Thank you for everything." The drive home was enveloped in silence, but it wasn't the tense quietude we had grown accustomed to. This silence felt pregnant with possibility, as if our relationship had undergone a subtle yet profound metamorphosis. Days later, as we savored wine in our living room, Michael broached the subject with cautious curiosity. "Emily," he began, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and intrigue. "I couldn't help but notice your absence during part of the event. Where did you disappear to?" His question hung in the air, laden with unspoken implications. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my chest as I formulated my response. "Oh, that," I replied, striving for nonchalance. The ambient noise made it challenging to converse, so we briefly relocated to a more secluded area for clearer communication. Michael's expression softened, and he gently squeezed my hand, a gesture that spoke volumes. Swirling the ruby liquid in my glass, I watched as Michael's features settled into a look of resolve. "I appreciate your honesty," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But I must confess, the thought of you with another man, it's almost unbearable. I realize now how much I've taken us for granted. I promise to invest more in our relationship, Emily. Please, stay with me on this journey of rediscovery." His heartfelt words stirred something within me, and before I could respond, Michael leaned in, pressing his lips to mine in a tender, passionate kiss. The familiar yet long-absent intimacy caught me off guard, sending a frisson of excitement through my body. As we melted into each other's embrace, I marveled at how this single act of affection could simultaneously feel so nostalgic and thrillingly new. That night, we rekindled the passionate fire that had smoldered for years, our lovemaking infused with a potent mixture of rediscovered desire and deepened emotional connection. It was as if we had been granted a second chance at our honeymoon phase, armed with the wisdom and appreciation that only years together could bring. In retrospect, our bold foray into partner swapping served as a catalyst for profound change in our relationship. Rather than driving us apart, it compelled us to confront our issues head-on, fostering a new level of honesty and understanding between us. We had successfully transmuted a potential crisis into an opportunity for growth, emerging with a bond that was not just renewed, but fundamentally strengthened and enriched.